The Committee on Homeland Security will come to order. The committee is meeting today to receive testimony on the Department of Homeland Security's use of facial recognition and other biometric technologies. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the committee in recess at any point. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Good morning. The Committee on Homeland Security is meeting to examine the Department of Homeland Security's use of facial recognition and other biometric technologies. The government's use of biometrics is not entirely new. For example, fingerprints have been used as an identification tool for many decades. Other biometrics include DNA, voice pattern, and palm prints. In recent years, facial recognition has become the new chosen form of biometric technology. As facial recognition technology has advanced, its use by the government and the private sector has also increased. Currently, DHS is collecting and storing several different kinds of biometric information and is using this information for multiple purposes. CBP and TSA are using biometrics to confirm the identities of travelers, for example. The Secret Service is piloting a surveillance system using facial recognition. I'm not opposed to biometric technology and recognize it can be valuable to Homeland Security and facilitation. However, its proliferation across DHS raises serious questions about privacy, data security, transparency, and accuracy. The American people deserve answers to those questions before the federal government rushes to deploy biometrics further. Last month, the committee held roundtable discussions with both industry and privacy and civil liberty stakeholders about the Department of Homeland Security's increasing use of biometric technology. Stakeholders have sufficient concerns that the data DHS is collecting and whether the department is safeguarding our rights appropriately. They have good reasons to be concerned. Absent standards, Americans may not know when, where, or why the department is collecting their biometrics. People also may not know that they have the right to opt out or how to do so. Worse yet, they may not know that biometric technology is in use, as it is the case when face recognition is used to passively surveil a crowd like under the Secret Service's pilot program. Recent reports also indicate ICE has been scanning through millions of Americans' driver's license photos without their knowledge or consent. These troubling reports are a stark reminder that biometric technologies should only be used for authorized purposes in a fully transparent manner. Data security is another important concern. Frankly, the federal government does not have a great track record securing America's personal data, and biometric information can be particularly insensitive. Unfortunately, earlier this year, a CBP subcontractor experienced a significant data breach, including travelers' images, raising important questions about data security. Americans want to know that if the government collects their biometric data, they are going to keep it secure from hackers and other bad actors. Moreover, the accuracy of certain biometric technology is in question, despite advancement in recent years. Studies by highly regarded academic institutions have found facial recognition systems, in particular, are not as accurate for women and darker-skinned individuals. Last July, the American Civil Liberties Union conducted a test using Amazon's facial recognition tool called Recognition. ACLU built a database of 25,000 publicly available arrest photos. Using Recognition, the ACLU searched the database using pictures of every current member of Congress. That software incorrectly matched 28 members with individuals who had criminal records. Although the misidentified members included both Democrats and Republicans, men and women, and a wide range of ages, nearly 40% of the false matches were people of color. This is unacceptable. It is not fair to expect certain people in our society to shoulder a disproportionate burden of the technology's shortcoming. Before the government deploys these technologies further, they must be scrutinized, and the American public needs to be given a chance to weigh in. Biometrics and facial recognition technology may be a useful homeland security and facilitation tool, but as with any tool, it has the potential to be misused, especially if it falls into the wrong hands. Today, the committee will hear from federal witnesses on this important topic. I'm pleased that we have witnesses from Customs and Border Protection, the Transportation Security Administration, the Secret Service, and the National Institute of Standards and Technology before us. They represent just a few of the agencies involved in the government's increasing use of biometric technology. I look forward to hearing from them about how they are using biometric technology currently, their future plans, and what they are doing to address these concerns. As Congress, it's our job to ensure they protect the rights of the American people before they move forward. I expect a good conversation toward that end today and continued oversight by the committee in the future. I ask unanimous consent to enter the following news articles and letters into the hearing's record. A June 10th Washington Post article entitled, U.S. Customs and Border Protection says photos of travelers were taken in a data breach. A July 7th Washington Post article entitled, FBI, ICE find state driver's license photos are a gold mine of facial recognition searches, and July 9th letters from American Association of Airport Executives, International Biometric Identity Association, and a coalition of privacy and civil liberties groups, many of whom were represented in our meetings and briefings last month. Without objection, so ordered. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Rogers, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Biometric technologies have the potential to improve security, facilitate travel, and better enforce our immigration laws. These technologies range from facial recognition to fingerprints to DNA. Each of these methods present unique privacy considerations, but also clear security benefits. Not only does federal law authorize DHS to use biometrics to verify identities, it requires CBP to collect biometric entry and exit data for all foreign nationals. This requirement has been a long-standing bipartisan mandate. Recent technological advancements have finally made it possible. DHS's primary focus is facial recognition at TSA and CBP checkpoints, where travelers are already providing IDs to government employees. TSOs and CBP agents can review several hundred IDs in a single shift. As a result, fatigue and human error allow people to fake IDs to slip into our country every day. Automating this process with biometric technology will improve transportation security. CBP and TSA have done their homework on these checkpoint pilots and are working to build accurate, effective, and secure systems. DHS should continue to collaborate with experts at NIST to ensure they are using accurate algorithms to power these systems. Biometric systems advance DHS's mission beyond transportation security. ICE recently conducted a rapid DNA pilot program to verify family ties on the southwest border. A 90-minute test can replace hours of interviews and document review. This short pilot found a disturbing number of cases where men who claimed to be the biological parent of a child quickly changed their story when asked to submit DNA. The technology does not store DNA in a central database, and each machine can be purged daily. Amid the humanitarian crisis on our border, we should be looking at things like rapid DNA to protect children from abuse by smugglers who rent them as a ticket into our country. Additionally, we should be using biometrics to enforce our immigration laws. Recent reports have emphasized ICE and FBI's use of DMV photos to identify criminals. I do not believe that anyone has a reasonable expectation of privacy in a government ID photo, period. Police have long relied on photo books and manual photo reviews to identify suspects known as fugitives, or known fugitives. Effective facial recognition technologies can improve law enforcement by ridding this process of bias and human error. Each of these examples use biometrics as a part of the process. Technology cannot and should not replace the officer's final judgment, but it can speed up the identity verification for millions of people every year. Halting all government biometric programs, as some of my colleagues suggest, is an easy way to avoid hard questions. Taking the easy way out of this issue will not increase the gap between technology and our ability to understand it. DHS should continue to consult with experts at NIST to develop clear public standards for government biometric systems. DHS leadership should ensure that these biometric databases are secure and have clear privacy guidelines. And Congress should continue to educate itself, as we are today, about the way we can employ this technology responsibly. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you. Other members of the committee are reminded that under the committee rules, opening statements may be submitted for the record. I now welcome our panel of witnesses. Our first witness is Mr. John Wagner, Deputy Executive Assistant Commissioner at the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Next, we have Mr. Austin Gold, the Assistant Administrator for Requirements and Capabilities Analysis at the Transportation Security Administration. Next, we have Mr. Joseph R. DePietro, the Chief Technology Officer of the U.S. Secret Service. Finally, we have Dr. Charles Romaine, the Director of the Information Technology Laboratory at the Commerce Department's National Institute of Standards and Technology. I look forward to hearing from you all today. Without objections, the witness's full statement will be inserted in the record. I now ask each witness to summarize his statement for 5 minutes, beginning with Mr. Wagner.
Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Rogers, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today on behalf of U.S. Customs and Border Protection. I'd like to begin with a few excerpts from the 9/11 Commission report. When people travel internationally, they usually move through defined channels or portals. They may seek to acquire a passport. They may apply for a visa. They may stop at ticket counters, gates, and exit controls at airports and seaports. Upon arrival, they pass through inspection points. They may transit to another gate to get on an airplane. Each of these checkpoints or portals is a screening, a chance to establish that people are who they say they are and are seeking access for their stated purpose. The job of protection is shared amongst these many defined checkpoints. By taking advantage of them all, we need not depend on any one point in the system to do the whole job. The challenge is to see the common problem across agencies and functions and develop a conceptual framework and architecture for an effective screening system. Throughout government and indeed in private enterprise, agencies, firms, and at these portals confront recurring judgments that balance security, efficiency, and civil liberties. These problems should be addressed systemically, not in an ad hoc, fragmented way. Like I mentioned, these are excerpts from the 9/11 Commission report. And before CBP presented our current strategy, airlines, airports, private vendors, and government agencies, including DHS, were developing their own independent biometric-based schemes. In other words, exactly what the 9/11 Commission warned against doing, an ad hoc, fragmented approach. CBP has developed a plan that includes other authorities and responsibilities in our mission set beyond just the biometric entry-exit mandate for foreign nationals. We saw the solution had to encompass the entire travel spectrum. We need a solution that would also comport with the modernization and emerging biometric plans of airports, airlines, and cruise lines. Why? Well, because we don't have a transportation system that allows the easy segmentation of only foreign visitors on international departures. Previous DHS efforts failed for 10 years because they tried to create a standalone, stovepiped, unintegrated process. And as we all know, those plans were cost prohibitive, would create massive congestion, and there was significant opposition from the airlines and the travel industry. So as a result, CBP developed a service that simply automates the manual facial recognition process that goes on today when a traveler presents a passport to establish their identity. To be clear, CBP is only comparing the picture taken against photos of previously provided by travelers to the U.S. government for the purposes of international travel. This is not a surveillance program. Since airlines and cruise lines are already required by statute to provide the biographic passport details of all travelers on international itineraries, CBP simply assembles a small gallery of photos of these expected travelers. These gallery photos are primarily from passports, visas, and previous international arrivals. A photo is taken and quickly searched against these distinct galleries, and thereby validating the biographic data that has already been vetted for national security and law enforcement concerns and corresponds to the traveler we all expect it to. We do not run the photo taken at the airport or seaport against any other databases or sources of information if it matches that pre-staged gallery photo. And if a traveler matches a U.S. passport, then the new photo taken is deleted. There's no need for us to keep it. U.S. citizens are clearly not part of the biometric entry-exit tracking system. Now, recognizing there have been concerns raised over the inclusion of U.S. citizens, CBP has existing authorities and responsibilities to determine the citizenship and identity of all people traveling internationally. This is a U.S. government responsibility, not the private sector. It's also unlawful for a U.S. citizen to travel internationally without a U.S. passport. Now, generally, determination of U.S. citizenship is done by comparing the traveler against their passport. Again, we're simply automating and using a computer algorithm to enhance this manual facial recognition existing process. And as we saw at Dulles Airport a few months ago, we had 2 travelers presenting U.S. passports claiming to be U.S. citizens. However, it was found that they were foreign nationals and imposters to these documents. Now, as far as our partnerships with the industry stakeholders, CBP's developed a standard set of business requirements that our partners have all agreed to if their camera is sending a photo to CBP. The business requirements clearly stipulate they cannot keep the photos. And going back to the ad hoc fragmented approach mentioned earlier, our partners have voluntarily agreed to the CBP business requirements. This makes a single, simple, consistent, transparent approach to the use of this technology for international travel. CBP is already bound by and in compliance with existing privacy, technology, and data collection requirements found in the Privacy Act, the E-Government Act, and the Homeland Security Act. Our private sector partners are basically signing on to these same requirements. We do recognize we can improve the public's understanding of these requirements and the opt-out provisions. We have published a comprehensive privacy impact assessment, the required system of record notice for our databases, and rulemaking has commenced to put updates into the federal regulations that's currently circulating within the government. In conclusion, we're solving a very difficult challenge, biometric exit. We're solving it by focusing on improving the overall travel experience. We're building a tokenless, efficient, secure international travel experience. Airlines and cruise lines have reported reduced boarding times and increased passenger satisfaction using this system. This system will allow us to build a world-class travel system in the U.S. This will be the envy of the world as we try to keep pace with the record-breaking growth in international travel. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your testimony. I now recognize Mr. Gold for summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Rogers, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me before you today to discuss the future of biometric identification at the Transportation Security Administration. I am Austin Gould, the Assistant Administrator for Requirements and Capabilities Analysis at TSA. I would like to thank the committee for working with TSA as we continue to improve the security of transportation systems, and particularly for your support of our officers in the field. The Aviation and Transportation Security Act of 2001 established TSA and the requirement to screen all passengers who are boarding aircraft. This screening requirement includes passenger identity verification. The Act specifically mentions TSA's authority to use biometrics for this purpose. Recognizing the need to positively identify passengers in an era when fraudulent means of identification are becoming increasingly prevalent and sophisticated, TSA has consistently sought new processes and technologies to improve performance while protecting a passenger's privacy. Biometrics represents such technology. In 2018, TSA released a biometrics roadmap which identifies the steps that the agency is taking to test and potentially expand biometric identification capability. The roadmap has 4 major goals: partner with Customs and Border Protection on biometrics for international travelers, operationalize biometrics for TSA pre-check passengers, potentially expand biometrics to additional domestic travelers, and develop the infrastructure to support these biometric efforts. Consistent with the biometrics roadmap, TSA is conducting pilots that use facial biometrics to verify passenger identity at certain airports. These pilots are of limited scope and duration and are being used to evaluate biometric technology for TSA use. These pilots have been executed in conjunction with Customs and Border Protection, have been supported by privacy impact assessments, and passengers have the opportunity to not participate. In these cases, the standard manual identification process is used. Last month, I observed the pilot currently underway in Terminal F in Atlanta for international passengers. The capture camera used for this pilot was in active mode, meaning that it only captured a facial image after the passenger was in position and the officer activated it. After the Committee on Government Oversight and Reform hearing on 4 June, TSA collected data in Atlanta that demonstrated that over 99% of travelers chose to use biometric identification. Also, based on feedback from the hearing, we have deployed signage in both Spanish and English to ensure that passengers are aware that biometrics are being used and the procedure for opting out. An example of that signage is currently displayed on the monitor. TSA is committed to addressing accuracy, privacy, and cybersecurity concerns associated with biometric capture and matching. In that regard, and pursuant to Section 1919 of the TSA Modernization Act, DHS will submit a report that includes assessments by TSA and CBP that were developed with the support of the DHS Science and Technology Directorate. The report will address accuracy, error rates, and privacy issues associated with biometric identification. We will also schedule a meeting with privacy groups later this summer to ensure that they understand TSA's limited use of biometric identification, have the opportunity to address any concerns, and as a follow-on to their participation in TSA's earlier Biometrics Industry Day. Looking ahead, TSA plans to continue to build upon the success of past pilots by conducting additional ones at select locations for limited durations to refine requirements for biometrics use. These pilots will continue to be supported by privacy impact assessments, clearly identified through bilingual airport signage, and passengers will always have the opportunity to choose not to participate. Biometrics represents a unique opportunity for TSA. This capability can increase security effectiveness for the entire aviation system, while also increasing throughput at the checkpoint and enhancing the passenger's experience. The ability to increase throughput while providing more accurate identification will be essential as passenger volumes continue to grow at approximately 4% annually. In fact, we experienced our busiest travel day ever last Sunday of the 4th of July weekend when we screened approximately 2.8 million passengers and crew. To close, TSA is systematically assessing biometrics for TSA use. This identification process will enhance aviation security while also increasing passenger throughput and making air travel more enjoyable. TSA's system will only be used for passenger identification and to direct the passenger to the appropriate level of screening, automating what is currently a manual process. It will not be used for any law enforcement purposes. And as always, passengers will have the opportunity to not participate. Thank you for the opportunity to address this important issue before the committee, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you for your testimony. I now recognize Mr. DePietro to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Rogers, and distinguished members of the committee. I'm Joseph DePietro, Chief Technology Officer of the United States Secret Service. I want to thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today and to discuss the Secret Service's use of biometrics in performance of our integrated mission. As previously conveyed to your committee staff, the Secret Service has significant concerns about testifying in an open hearing on how we use facial recognition technology to enhance our protective mission. Therefore, my testimony today on that issue will focus on the current facial recognition technology pilot program we are conducting at the White House complex. The Secret Service closely guards our means and methods as to how we execute our protective mission. We are aware that our adversaries are constantly watching and probing us and could potentially exploit information discussed in this open environment to use against us. It would not be wise or prudent to discuss in a public setting certain assets, capabilities, and protocols used to carry out our protective mission. However, we would welcome the opportunity to provide this information to you in a closed briefing. Biometric tools such as fingerprint analysis and DNA collection are used on a regular basis by the Secret Service to investigate, locate, and sometimes arrest individuals who have committed crimes, to include offenses related to threats against Secret Service protectees. We understand that the rapid expansion of biometric technology creates a need to balance capabilities with the need to preserve the public's expectation of privacy, and the Secret Service is committed to ensuring a balance that protects the rights of all individuals. With respect to fingerprints and palm prints, the Secret Service has a long-standing program that plays an integral part in our investigative and personal security processes. Our ability to process, store, search, and retrieve fingerprint and palm print images is an operational necessity. During the course of investigations involving fingerprint and palm print evidence, forensic examiners at the Secret Service utilize a variety of regional and national databases to search latent prints for matches to known subjects. With respect to DNA, DNA evidence is one of the most effective identification tools available to law enforcement today. Advances related to DNA technology have been rapid, and the Secret Service remains dedicated to utilizing new applications to enhance our integrated mission. The Secret Service collects DNA samples along with a subject's fingerprints as part of the identification and arrest process. Samples are sent to the FBI and DNA testing, search, and storage in the National DNA Database. With respect to facial recognition technology, the Secret Service recognizes that this technology has the potential to be a powerful tool that may assist in preventing attacks on our protectees, and there must be an appropriate balance between security and any potential privacy or other constitutional concerns. In 2014, former Secretary of Homeland Security Johnson established an independent protective mission panel to conduct an assessment of security at the White House complex. Among other important recommendations, the panel stated, technology systems used on the complex must always remain on the cutting edge, and the Secret Service must invest in technology, including becoming a driver of research and development that may assist in its mission. In furtherance of these recommendations, the Secret Service is currently working on a facial recognition pilot. The goal of the pilot is to determine whether facial recognition technology could be effectively deployed to enhance our protective mission. While the pilot started in December 2018 and is scheduled to be completed by the end of August 2019, the Secret Service began contemplating this pilot as far back as August 2014. The participants in the pilot are Secret Service employees who volunteered to take part in this effort. Designated White House cameras that are part of the video management system capture the volunteers as they move through various locations around the White House complex. Software running on a server dedicated to the pilot and on a closed network not connected to the internet seeks to match the images of the volunteers to the images in the video streams. Facial images are stored when associated with a match to one of the volunteers, and at the conclusion of the pilot, all images will be purged. The Secret Service's commitment to maintaining First Amendment protections and desire to address personal privacy considerations are central factors behind any future implementation of facial recognition technology. The Secret Service will not adopt new technologies unless they've been thoroughly vetted to ensure that sufficient privacy protections and data safeguards are in place. In closing, the protection of our nation's leaders is paramount to this agency and to the nation. The partnerships represented here today, both in Congress and within DHS, are critical to the success of Secret Service operations. I thank you for the opportunity to testify concerning the agency's use of these evolving technologies, and I look forward to working with you as we move forward. This concludes my testimony. I welcome any questions you have at this time.
Thank you for your testimony. I now recognize Dr. Romaine to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Rogers, and members of the committee, I'm Chuck Romaine, Director of the Information Technology Laboratory at the Department of Commerce's National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss NIST's role in biometric standards and testing for facial recognition technology. In the area of biometrics, NIST has been working with public and private sectors since the 1960s. NIST's work improves the accuracy, quality, usability, interoperability, and consistency of identity management systems and ensures that United States interests are represented in the international arena. NIST research has provided state-of-the-art technology benchmarks and guidance to industry and to U.S. government agencies that depend on biometrics recognition. NIST leads national and international consensus standards activities in biometrics, such as facial recognition technology, but also in cryptography, electronic credentialing, secure network protocols, software and systems reliability, and security conformance testing, all essential to accelerate the development and deployment of information and communication systems that are interoperable, reliable, secure, and usable. NIST's biometric evaluations advance the technology by identifying and reporting gaps and limitations of current biometric recognition technologies. NIST evaluations advance measurement science by providing a scientific basis for what to measure and how to measure. NIST evaluations also facilitate development of consensus-based standards by providing quantitative data for development of scientifically sound, fit-for-purpose standards. Since 2000, NIST's Face Recognition Vendor Testing Program, or FRVT, has assessed capabilities of facial recognition algorithms for one-to-many identification and one-to-one verification. NIST expanded its facial recognition evaluations in 2017. NIST broadened the scope of its work in this area to understand the upper limits of human capabilities to recognize faces and how these capabilities fit into facial recognition applications. Historically and currently, NIST biometrics research has assisted the Department of Homeland Security, DHS. NIST's research was used by DHS in its transition from 2 to 10 prints for the former U.S. Visit program. Currently, NIST is collaborating with DHS OBIM on face image quality standards and with DHS Customs and Border Patrol on the evaluation of their traveler verification service. NIST is working with DHS Customs and Border Patrol to analyze performance impacts due to image quality and traveler demographics and provide guidance and data that allows CBP to set a threshold given CBP's security and facilitation goals for large-scale face recognition of travelers. NIST's Face Recognition Vendor Testing Program was established in 2000 to provide independent evaluations of both prototype and commercially available facial recognition algorithms. Significant progress has been made in algorithm improvements since the program was created. NIST is researching how to measure the accuracy of forensic examiners matching identity across different photographs. The study measures face identification accuracy for an international group of professional forensic facial examiners working under circumstances approximating real-world casework. The findings, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, showed that examiners and other human face specialists, including forensically trained facial reviewers and untrained super recognizers, were more accurate than the control groups on a challenging test of face identification. It also presented data comparing state-of-the-art facial recognition algorithms with the best human face identifiers. Optimal face identification was achieved only when humans and machines collaborated. As with all areas, for face recognition, rigorous testing and standards development can increase productivity and efficiency in government and industry, expand innovation and competition, broaden opportunities for international trade, conserve resources, provide consumer benefit and choice, improve the environment, and promote health and safety. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on NIST's activities in facial recognition, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Mr. Wagner, you talked a little bit about the biometric entry and exit system, and those of us who've been around, we've historically supported that system. But in the beginning, we talked about that system would be only used for foreigners. And based on what I heard you talk about today, you've expanded that to take in American citizens. Can you explain the reasoning for that?
Yes, U.S. citizens are clearly outside the scope of the biometric entry-exit tracking. The technology we're using for the entry-exit program, we're also using to validate the identity of the U.S. citizen. Because someone has to do that. Someone has to determine who's in scope or out of scope. And someone has to validate that the U.S. citizen is the person presenting that U.S. passport. So once we take the picture and match it against the passport photo, which is what goes on right now just in a manual review, we use the algorithm to help make that decision, and then the photo's discarded after that because there's no need for us to save it.
And what I'm trying to get at is this was a policy that CBP more or less expanded, even though Congress gave you the authority to look at foreigners.
Well, it helps us and the airlines determine who's in scope for biometric exit and who's out, because someone has to make that determination at the boarding area. It'd be unfair to ask the airline to be able to do that, to determine who's in scope or out of scope.
But you kind of see what I'm saying, though. Did CBP come back and say to Congress, we're looking at expanding this authority, but we need congressional approval?
We don't see this as expanding the biometric entry-exit authority. We see this as using the authorities we have to determine the citizenship of an individual entering or departing the U.S. If we're looking for a U.S. citizen departing the U.S. right now because they have a warrant for their arrest, we'll stop travelers in the jetway and check their passports.
I understand why you're
using
doing
those authorities.
Yeah, I understand why you're doing it. What I'm getting at is part of this hearing is to make sure that we, as members of Congress, give you the authority you need to do your job. But part of what I'm hearing is you've kind of taken your own initiative to do some things beyond the scope of authority that Congress gave you. So what I'd like for you to do is provide the committee with the written policy by which you're doing this.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Dr. Romain, I'm gonna try to get it right. You've been advising DHS a lot on some of these things. Have you looked at this expansion of authority without congressional intent with DHS?
No, sir, that would be outside of NIST's mission space, which is technical evaluation and standards of the algorithms.
All right, well, have you looked at the collection of data and how the data management is controlled once it's collected?
No, sir.
Mr. Wagner, I'm back to you then. Explain to the committee this collection of data that you said this policy gives you. What do you do with it?
So when the picture is taken and provided to, and comes into CBP, and we match it against one of our pre-staged gallery photos that's comprised of passports and visas and previous arrivals, if it's a foreign national subject to the biometric entry-exit mandate, that photograph will be sent over to DHS, to OBIM, to be stored in IDENT, which is the department's repository for that information. If it's a U.S. citizen and that document, that photo matches a U.S. passport or a permanent resident or somebody outside of the scope of entry-exit, that photograph would be held for 12 hours and then deleted or purged from our systems. And the only reason we hold it for that short period of time is just in case the system crashes and we have to restore everything.
Okay, are you aware of the recent subcontractor breach of data?
Oh, yes.
Beg pardon?
Yes.
So how is that inconsistent with what you just explained to us?
What we were doing with that, that subcontractor is we were testing their camera on the U.S.-Mexico land border in a standalone pilot system. So it wasn't integrated into the main CBP network, and we were testing the taking of the photographs and the license plates and the ability to take a picture of a person in a vehicle and whether that would be matchable. In this case, apparently, as far as I understand, the contractor physically removed those photographs from the camera itself and put it onto their own network, which was then breached. The CBP network was not hacked. The contractor, and what we see is, what I believe is they removed that in violation of the contract, and that's why our relationship has been severed with them, and we're conducting an investigation.
So you see my concern about how we control the data we collect?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yield to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wagner, I want to pick up on what the chairman was talking about. My understanding of your response a few moments ago is that it's your belief that you have the existing statutory authority to do what you're doing. You're just exercising new technology in that process. Is that an accurate representation of what your answer was?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Romain, this has been an evolving technology. Can you tell us what have been the big changes, if any, over the last 5 years when it comes to the use of facial recognition and biometrics in general?
Certainly, thank you. The advances have been dramatic, according to our testing. The accuracy and capabilities of the newer systems that we've seen in the last few years.
What would be some examples of newer systems?
The advent of convolutional neural networks as machine learning capability to do the image analysis or image matching.
Is that AI? Is that what you're talking about?
It's machine learning and artificial intelligence, yes, sir.
What else?
So these are dramatically improved over previous technologies that relied specifically on particular characteristics of faces, for example. With suitable training, these systems have dramatically improved the accuracy for the best facial recognition systems. Now, I want to be clear, for the testing that we've done, there's still a very wide range of performance in the testing that we've done and the algorithms that we've tested. But the best ones, and we have no direct knowledge of the convolutional neural networks or the machine learning because these are submitted to us as black boxes and we don't examine that. But in conversations with vendors who have submitted testing, that's the understanding that we have is that new machine learning capability, the deep neural networks, has been the significant advance.
Has this development or this advancement in the area of machine learning alleviated in any way the concerns the chairman expressed about facial recognition being less accurate when it comes to females or darker-skinned individuals?
We see, because of the significant increases in the accuracy across the board, the effect of those demographic effects is diminishing. We have a report, we're doing an analysis now, a comprehensive analysis of demographic effects under the testing that we've just done, and that report should be out this fall.
When you have these test results, do you share those with the, not only DHS and their agencies, but the public, the business community?
We do, sir.
Great.
We do that through public reporting and also through dissemination with email and other interested parties.
Do you publish those guidelines for the public consumption as well?
We do.
Excellent.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I have a letter here from the Security Industry Association supporting the use of biometrics and facial recognition, and I'd like to offer it for the record.
Without objection.
With that, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Roman, just so we're clear, the report you referenced is not out.
That's correct, sir. It should be out this fall.
So the data right now is that women and dark-skinned people are misidentified more than anybody else.
There are demographic effects that affect age, so significant changes in age over time, age, race, and sex. There are demographic effects. Quantifying those in a statistically valid manner is what we're currently doing.
So is that women and dark-skinned people?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to, thank you. Chair recognizes Mr. Correa for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing up this most important issue. This technology is very interesting because compared to fingerprints, DNA, you give it without essentially giving permission. You walk down a corridor, some camera picks you up, picks up your information, and it is used without your authority or permission in ways that we don't know about. Dr. Romaine, you talked about false positives based on ethnicity, other factors that are still, the technology has not gotten to the point where it can account for these factors. Mr. Wagner, I have a question for you, which is, under the TSA Modernization Act of last year, it requires a public report on the deployment of biometric technologies, TSA's assessments of privacy accurate. That report is now late. Any thoughts on when that report
Sure.
Be
The
presented
report's
to us?
drafted, it's just circulating for final approval and signature.
So at any time now?
Anytime.
Okay. Will that be something that'll be compared to Dr. Romain's report also that'll be coming out very soon?
Sir, moving forward from a TSA perspective, we'll look at any scientific reports and data that we possibly can to ensure that biometric identification is performing optimally for our use cases. Yes, sir.
And so before we get that report, let me nonetheless ask you, Mr. Wagner, right now, the way facial recognition is being used by your department, is this affecting or unduly burdening foreign travelers, race, gender, nationality?
No, we are not seeing, in a review of our data, we are not seeing any significant error rates that are attributable to a specific demographic. And that's why we've also partnered with NIST to come in and review our data and help us look at it and make sure.
So statistically, you do have Mr. Gold, is it, that's reviewing this data, or who's reviewing this data for you? To make sure that
We're
what you're
reviewing
saying, your conclusion is that it's not adversely affecting commerce, tourism. I'm from the state of California where commerce, tourism is a big part of our economy. I just want to make sure we're not having a lot of false negatives.
This is having a beneficial effect on that because it's allowing airlines and cruise lines to board and unboard people quicker.
Excellent. Want to hear that? Just want to make sure that we see that in the
Passenger
report.
experience is being improved by that. We're reviewing internally our own data, and we're not seeing noticeable discrepancies in that, but we've partnered with NIST, and throughout this summer and fall, we'll be examining our data very closely to make sure that we're not unduly hurting people of a specific demographic.
And I'm glad to hear your enthusiastic, positive answer that it's not a burdening unduly some of those travelers.
Absolutely, we're not
As
going to
that
build a
great
system that
Californian Ronald Reagan said, we got to trust, but we got to verify too.
Absolutely.
So I look forward to seeing your data on that and making sure we're on it. In terms of the data, the purging of the data once you're using it, what system do you have to audit to make sure that that data is actually purged in a timely manner? You just mentioned one of your subcontractors had a breach. That information is somewhere out there. You said that is the reason you terminated that contract. Yet, to me, when that information gets out there, terminating a contract is not enough of a, let's say, a deterrent to making sure that those kinds of breaches, that data is actually purged in a timely manner. Are you doing anything to make sure that we tighten up that part of your system?
Yes, so the subcontractor may face subsequent action depending on the results of the
Criminal, civil,
potentially.
both?
Potentially, depending on what the investigation, and our Office of Professional Responsibility is investigating this, I believe the IG is investigating this, depending on the circumstances of how the data was taken and the intentions and why and, how it was used, there potentially could be criminal actions or
When you have
other-
those data breaches, who do you report those to and under what time do you actually take to say, hey, this purge or this breach happened?
Well, they're supposed to report it to us almost immediately. We do report it to Congress if it meets a certain threshold. And then internally, we will...
What threshold would that be?
I don't know offhand.
I'd like to look at that a little closer because clearly small breach versus a large breach, is that your threshold? Size of the breach, what's the threshold?
I believe it's 100,000, but we'll get back to you on that.
Mr. Chairman, I'm out of time, but I think it's very important that these kinds of breaches be reported immediately to Congress.
I agree.
Mr. Chairman, I'm out of time, so I yield.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We all want to protect civil liberties and privacy. When somebody's in the public domain, as I understood in law school, there's no expectation of privacy. This technology, in my judgment, has really protected the nation from drug smugglers, gang members, and potential terrorists. I introduced the BitMap bill, which is a biometric transnational migration alert program. Last Congress, it passed unanimously out of this committee. It passed on the House floor 272 to 119. and now it's being held up. I'd like to examine what the effect of not authorizing this program would have. Mr. Wagner, can you tell me what successes the bitmap program has had, and particularly when it comes to individuals coming from other parts of the world that are known, they're basically countries of special interest aliens, or KSTs, known as suspected terrorists, coming across into this hemisphere up through Latin America into the United States of America?
Sure. So the bitmap program, it's administered by ICE. It's a program they work with their foreign counterparts to utilize fingerprint technology to take fingerprints of exactly those populations you just referenced as they transit through certain countries in Central or South America, making their way on up through Mexico to the U.S. So if they show up in a Central American country, the foreign authorities will use the bitmap program to collect the passport information and their fingerprints. When that person ultimately shows up at our southwest border and has mysteriously lost their passport, we're able to take their fingerprints and match it back up with that previous encounter in Central America to sufficiently identify who that person is. And this is the passport they had at that point.
And is it true that through that journey that while the names and identities may change,
Sure.
their biometrics do not change?
Correct.
And that's the best way to identify who this person really is?
Correct.
Can you, in this setting, and I don't know if that's possible, give us some indication of the numbers of special interest aliens that have been stopped in this program, and also known or suspected terrorists?
I have to get back to you on that. I don't have any today.
How significant is it?
It's significant. I mean, it's an absolute vulnerability that, as we've seen, terrorists can exploit, and it's a vulnerability we need to address.
Dr. Romney, I guess from what I'm hearing from you is that we don't want to get this wrong. I think Ms. Watson-Coleman was talking about herself being possibly in this pool of candidates that could get somehow mischaracterized. I mean, tell us, where are we right now with the technology?
I guess,
How accurate is it?
How accurate is it? Oh, I see. The very best algorithms that we've tested the most recently have false negative rates that are extremely low. The accuracy can range into for the best algorithms in a one-to-many match can range into the 99.7 range.
So 99.7% accuracy.
Accuracy. Yes.
That's pretty good.
I beg your pardon?
That's a pretty good number.
It's, from a scientific standpoint, we report the number. The judgment on what is a pretty good number is up to the policymakers, but it's a high number for me.
It's very high. You're a scientist, I'm not, but it sounds pretty high to me. I think it's always a balance in this committee, and when we deal with security issues, we deal with privacy and civil liberties, we always have to balance these as Americans, and I think it's important that we balance those factors, but I wouldn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think the bitmap program has been extremely successful, has stopped a lot of bad actors from coming into the United States. And Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, I hope that this committee, we could still advance that authorization and that bill through this Congress, because I do think it's important to protect the American people. It's one of the most important responsibilities that we have as members of Congress. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes the young lady from New Mexico, Ms. Tara Small, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Last month, the CBP announced that there was a data breach with some of the subcontractors operating at land ports of entry along the southern border. And as a result, thousands of license plate numbers and images of drivers were taken by, and images of drivers that were taken by facial recognition technology were compromised. I represent multiple border towns where we cross back and forth into Mexico for jobs, shopping, tourism, medicine. I also, within the interior of the district, there are border checkpoints, and when they're operating, that same information is being taken, license plates and facial and pictures of people's faces. And so we want to be able to make sure that the citizens' data is secure. Were there audits into the subcontractor system prior to the hack?
I'm not aware of that. I don't know. I'll have to check.
Can you get back to us on that, please? Thank you. And did these private subcontractors have the authority to store those U.S. citizens' data?
They did not have the authority to have the pictures taken by the camera, from what I understand.
Oh, so not even to store it. They did not have the authority to take any pictures of faces.
They had the authority to take them. They did not have the authority to take it off the camera and put it onto their own network, which is apparently what happened.
They did. Okay. And what protocols does CBP have in place to oversee contractor and subcontractor data security practices?
I mean, they go through background checks. They're vetted. They're cleared. They're trained on use of the systems that they're going to work on. As far as having the audit controls on, well, this was a standalone pilot, so it was outside of our normal network, and we apparently did not have the same level of controls and audit capabilities on that because it was a standalone closed system. Those are things being put into place now. On all those systems to make sure you can't connect a portable media drive on that and extract information. You know, our main network has these protocols on them, but we didn't have them on this type of system.
So did you say those are in place now? You've corrected the problem?
They're being put into place
They're
now.
being put into place now?
Yes.
Can you follow up and let us know when they are in place? It's
Absolutely.
something that's
Yes.
deep concern. Thank you. And with all pilot programs, because I remember going through the border checkpoints and being told, you know, this is a pilot, so don't worry about it yet. It's just a pilot. That's actually when we need to make sure that we're operating it correctly.
Agree.
So I want to switch now to congressional authorization. Mr. Wagner, it's my understanding that it is the laws that Congress is enacting a biometric entry-exit system limit data collection to foreign nationals. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And under what authority is CBP collecting biometric information on U.S. citizens as part of the entry-exit system?
We're using the information under 8 U.S.C. 1357B and 8 CFR 235.1, which allows us to consider any information or evidence pertaining to a person crossing the border and establishing their U.S. citizenship. So generally, a person will present a U.S. passport to us. We can look at it. We can manually review it. We can ask them questions how they obtained it.
Thank you. And I'm going to switch direction really quickly. I apologize. I know some of that was already covered, so I appreciate it. I want to switch to the federal agencies that are scanning through U.S. Citizens' driver's licenses, and ICE is one of those that's been identified as potentially scanning through these databases. For what purpose are your components currently attempting to or successfully accessing state driver's license databases in any way?
So for the biometric program we're discussing, we're not using driver's license information. We do use driver's license information from the states that have entered into agreements with us where their driver's license also substitutes for a passport to cross the border, and I think we have about 5 U.S. states and maybe 4 Canadian provinces that entered into written agreements with us to mark the citizenship of the driver's license holder on the document so they can cross the border without having to go get a passport that serves in lieu of the passport.
Does the DMV in those states require probable cause or warrants to access that information?
Well, when that person crosses the border, our agreement allows us to verify with them that that is a valid license and to retrieve the photo from that so we can see who it belongs to. We also have other law enforcement access through into biographical driver's license data that we also might use in a law enforcement context that's very common for law enforcement agencies to access.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner.
Thank you very much. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Katko, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. Just take a step back for a moment. As a federal prosecutor for 20 years, routinely dealing with homicides and matters of violent crime, some of the tools in the toolbox that I had were fingerprints at first and later DNA. When they both came online, at first was concerns about how they were to be used, and now they're becoming more mainstream. And I hope and pray that it's the same with facial recognition. But all three have the capability not only of helping to solve crimes, but also making sure that crimes aren't committed. But even something we don't think about enough is exonerating people who are falsely accused. I mean, look what the DNA system has done for people falsely accused in prisons. It's been a remarkable breath of fresh air. So my concern is not with the efficacy of using it. My concern is that we get it right, like we've done with fingerprints and like I think we're doing with DNA. So my questions focus on the accuracy and the things we need to do to make it better. And my colleagues have asked some great questions about the use of it and the extent of the use, and we're going to have more discussions about that. I'm very concerned about the accuracy. And that was a big thing with DNA starting out, and now DNA is, the accuracy in the testing is amazing. And it's a dispositive almost all the time. I don't think we're there yet with facial recognition. I'd like to get there. So with that in mind, I want to ask Mr. Romine a couple of questions. You talk about the fact that you're charged with examining the gaps and limitations of certain things, including facial recognition. So what do you see as the gaps and limitations of it right now?
The principal gaps and limitations we see involve a couple of things. One is image quality. It's still true, garbage in, garbage out for software systems. And so image quality has a huge impact. We see, as I said, I'll have a report on demographics, and there are certain issues associated with demographic effects. That's particularly true when you're trying to identify someone when you have a reference image that's maybe 10, 20 years earlier than the person that you're trying to identify. That can be a very big challenge. Similarly, if someone has been injured or there's some obscuring of the face for other reasons, that can have a challenge. Images that are taken non-cooperatively, and I don't mean uncooperative, I mean where someone is not standing still looking at a camera with the intent of registering an image. If you're taking an image through a windshield, for example, or if you're taking an image of someone who's walking and not facing a camera, those can have significant impacts on the accuracy and the ability of these systems to do identification.
Okay. What can we do to improve that portion of it?
The industry continues to make advances. I mentioned the emergence of convolutional neural networks as a game changer in this space, and I think we don't know what we don't know coming down the pike, but I think there are continue to be improvements that we see in our testing over time. So the industry is making great strides.
Okay. Now, you mentioned also, in response to a question from one of my colleagues, that the demographic effects of facial recognition software are diminishing. Could you expound on that and what you mean by that? Because you say it's 99.7% accurate, but it's probably not 99.7% accurate for certain segments, like, for example, darker skinned female. And I want to know what you're doing to make that better and how we can make it stronger.
That's correct. From NIST perspective, what we do to make things better is provide an evaluation capability. So we're not doing any training.
No, that's understood.
Development. However, I would say that anytime the overall performance of the system improves as dramatically as facial recognition has improved over the last 5 to 6 years, the compression, the effect of differences in demographics shrinks as well. And the report later, once we've finished our analysis, the report that comes out in the fall will
That
be able
sort
to
of answers my
quantify.
question, but I mean, you'll admit that, you know, certain demographics have a disproportionate error rate. And so you're saying it's improving. How much has it improved?
We haven't finished the analysis yet, so I'm not able to answer that question currently. The report will come out in the fall. I will say that it is unlikely that we will ever achieve a point where every single demographic is identical in performance across the board, whether that's age, race, or sex. But we want to know just exactly how much the difference is.
And this report will detail that when it comes out in the fall?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
We all look forward to the report,
Indeed.
I assure you. Chair now recognizes the young lady from Illinois, Ms. Underwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gold, I represent Illinois' 14th District, where we drive about an hour or two to get to a major airport in Chicago. And so our community is always interested in learning more about the technologies that can potentially improve security at airports while still reducing the flyers' wait time. However, before implementing any new technologies like biometric screening, it's really important, crucial even, to make sure that they're proven to be effective, reliable, and fair. So can you please run through the ways in which TSA is currently employing biometric screening at checkpoints?
Yes, ma'am. Currently, we're only using biometrics technology in the International Terminal, Terminal F in Atlanta, and that's on a pilot basis. Our approach to biometrics implementation at TSA is extremely deliberative. We want to understand how the technology works, how it can improve identity verification for the traveling public, and how it can improve the passenger experience. Going back to the discussion on image quality that happened before, we're in a fortunate case at TSA in that we really control the environment in our checkpoints, so we can ensure optimal lighting, optimal distance from the camera, so we get the highest quality images possible for biometric matching. For the pilot in Atlanta, we're matched up with CBP using their TVS system, and we see extremely high match rates there. Moving forward, we'll look to pilot one-to-one matching capability where a traveler will provide a credential. That credential will be assessed by our CAT machine, and it will return a match rate on whether or not the face that's been captured matches the face that's embedded in that credential. In that scenario, no information even leaves the checkpoint, and nothing's retained on the camera. So that's some of the things that we're looking at, and I believe that when we're through with these pilots that we're doing for biometric development, we will see that we can not only improve passenger security, but also make it a much more positive experience for the traveling public by reducing wait times.
That's great. How are the airports and airlines using the biometric security screening technology beyond the TSA checkpoints, if you're aware, and what other uses are planned for the future?
So right now I can comment on really what we're doing in Atlanta with Delta Airlines.
Okay.
In Atlanta, the Delta Airlines kiosks use biometric identification to when the passenger checks in to make sure, should they choose to do so, to make sure that that person is actually the passenger who's ticketed on that particular flight. TSA has oversight of the bag drop to ensure that passengers are positively matched to bags in the international, for international travel. And so Delta Airlines has a security program amendment that we've granted them to use biometric technology to do that matching at the bag drop. We use it at our checkpoint in Atlanta, and then it's, of course, it's used at the exit point, at the gate.
Okay, and so is that the only specific agreement with an airport or airline that TSA has to govern the use of biometrics? So you
Right
said
now,
Delta.
the security program amendment that we've granted Delta for the limited use only in Atlanta is the only formal agreement that we've entered into with the airlines.
And so does TSA have any role in approving airport and airline uses of biometric technology?
We have roles in approving the use of biometric technology where TSA has equities. And again, I would go back to say that would be the checkpoint and the bag drop. So if an airline wanted to use biometrics at the bag drop to positively match that traveler to that bag, they would have to request a security program amendment, and we would have to issue it.
Okay. As the use of biometric data continues to expand, Illinoisans understandably have a lot of questions about how such sensitive personal data is used and stored. And so I'd like to open this question up to the panel. Under what circumstances do your components collect biometric data on U.S. citizens? So we can start with Mr. Wagner.
Did you say collect on U.S. citizens?
Yes, sir.
We're temporarily holding it while we validate that it corresponds to the passport that person's presenting, and then it's purged after 12 hours from our system.
Okay.
From a TSA perspective, we're leveraging photographs that travelers have provided to facilitate travel, like passport photographs. When we capture the image at the checkpoint, it is not retained at the camera. Once that image is encrypted and transmitted, we only get back a match result.
Interesting. Okay.
Ma'am, Secret Service collects fingerprints, palm prints, mug shots, other identifying information on individuals who we arrest as part of our criminal investigations.
But not as part of regular screening?
Pardon
You don't
me?
retain the data that you collect as part of the regular screening?
That's correct.
You don't store it?
No. In regular screening, we use metal detectors, cabinet x-rays, things like that.
And fingerprints. So to get into the White House?
No, you don't, we
Okay.
do not use fingerprints at the
Okay.
White House. We don't scan for that.
Great. Yes, sir.
The data that we have is sequestered in servers that are air-gapped. They're not connected to the internet. In a locked door that I'm the director of the laboratory, and I'm not permitted to go into that room without being escorted. So it's very tightly controlled.
Thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you. Chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 99.7%, that's pretty good, or about, ironically, the same on-base percentage that Cedric Richmond has at our annual baseball game, but that's another topic here. So, a problem, I should say, not a topic. But I do have a question for you, Dr. Romine. How do you ensure, and I think Ms. Underwood was just kind of approaching this, how do you ensure that the biometric data collected is secured? Let me unpack a little bit more. Is the biometric identifier connected directly to other possibly sensitive or private information about the person?
The data that we have on facial recognition is not connected to identifying information. And so I'll have to double check the exact features there, but I'm.
Can you do that for us and report back? So you're saying that the information that you're collected is secured?
The information we're collecting, we don't collect information, we obtain it from our partners for the purposes of evaluation only, and we secure that it's in a secure server.
Let's use the word obtain instead of collect. You ever had a breach on the information you've obtained?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. Questions for the panel. If you can keep it about 10 to 15 seconds, it'd be good. That way we can get everybody in here. Can you elaborate more on these programs that have been successful, specifically on the ones that are identifying facial recognition and any other biometric technologies? If you can elaborate either on the success of them or adding security benefits or expediting travel for passengers. We'll start with Mr. Wagner.
Sure. It gives us the ability to validate a person's biographical identity within 2 to 3 seconds without having to actually handle the physical passport. It allows us to link it up in a secure way. So the person we did all our national security checks against, and TSA has done their national security checks against on international flights, corresponds to the person who's in front of us.
Okay, Mr. Gold?
Sir, with our pilot in Atlanta, we did data collection on the number of people who were choosing not to provide biometric identification at our checkpoint, and it was less than 1%. People seem to enjoy it. The traveling public moves to the checkpoint very rapidly, and the best part of it is we enhance identity verification, thereby enhancing security.
Okay. Mr. Petrie, does that impact you at all?
Not really. Right now, we're piloting some technology, but we're in the middle of that test right now, so we haven't compiled the data. The test will finish up at the end of August, then we'll have a chance to go through and review the data, and then we'll be able to draw some conclusions. But at this point, we're still in the middle of the test.
Dr. Romine, anything there?
No, sir.
Okay. Going down the panel again, based on these successes, specifically Mr. Wagner, Mr. Gold, where do you see the use of biometric technologies expanding in your specific agency, even beyond a complete rollout of the pilot programs? Mr. Wagner.
It will significantly transform the arrivals and departures on international travel in all our different environments, air, land, and sea, and really build a very convenient, efficient, facilitative, but yet secure process for us to do that.
Mr. Gold?
Sir, so for us, we'll build on the success of our international partnership with CBP that we're doing in Atlanta to other international travel locations. We'll look to use the CBP system for our trusted traveler population, pre-check global entry, to do one-to-few or one-to-many matching for biometrics purposes at our checkpoints. And then really the next step that we're looking at is that one-to-one matching that I mentioned before, where a traveler can approach the checkpoint, provide a credential, have the CAP machine, credential authentication technology machine, assess the image embedded in that credential, and then match it to a photograph that's taken right there.
All right. Mr. DePietro, do you ever share your information with local or state governments?
Information with respect to fingerprints.
Information that you collect. Let me back up and ask this question because I think I've got time to get it in. Ms. Underwood asked a couple questions. There seemed to be just a touch of hesitancy, so I wanted to follow back up there. The data that you collect, is it ever collected without subjects being aware?
No, sir.
Okay, all right. So the information that you do collect, fingerprints, et cetera, do you ever share that with state or local?
I'd have to check with our lab director on that, sir, and get back to you.
Are you familiar with any circumstances that you have in the past?
Sir, I'm the Secret Service's Chief Technology Officer. I work more on the engineering and technical side. I'd have to get with our Forensic Services Division to answer that.
Fair enough. I thank you for your time. I yield that back, Mr. Chairman.
Just let me comment. In a classified setting, we're going to ask that question again, of the data collected that people don't know, because I think there is information being collected in the pilot at the White House that is different from the answer, but we plan to have a classified briefing on that issue. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from New York for 5 minutes, Ms. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Some would say let's not make, when it comes to national security, let's not make the perfect be the enemy of the good. But unfortunately, the good is not good enough when bias is baked into the algorithms that create false positives. The stakes are far too high for individuals and too costly, particularly for women and people of color. The wide-scale deployment of facial recognition technology will have profound implications on privacy. We must look before we leap. It is imperative that Congress impose safeguards against mission creep and ensure biased algorithms do not make their way into widespread use. As a New Yorker, one who lives just miles away from ground zero, national security is crucially important, and I know that firsthand. But facial recognition technologies that routinely misidentify women and people of color don't make us safer, they make us less safe. Using this technology to help ICE target immigrants for deportation doesn't protect us from terrorism, it terrorizes hardworking families. And when CBP uses these technologies in the on U.S. citizens traveling abroad without providing a transparent opt-out process, that's potentially unlawful. We've seen what happens when technology is widely deployed before Congress can impose meaningful safeguards. Let's not make the same mistake with facial recognition technology. If you have a contractor that has a breach, and we know that we're seeing more use of video, deep fakes, if you will, that information gets in the hand of an adversary overseas, and they want to create a disruption in our nation. All you have to do is take that information, create a video from it, and bam, we're already into a really bad situation. I don't know if we're looking at the interconnectedness of all of these technologies, particularly because they're all evolving. And I'm very concerned about the lack of specificity that we have at this stage. So my question is about accuracy. Mr. Wagner, CBP boasts that the facial recognition algorithm it uses is able to make a match of 98 or 99% of the time. But that statistic does not include instances where facial recognition technology is unable to capture a high-quality image due to human error, poor lighting, or other environmental factors. Recent testing by the DHS Science and Technology Directorate has shown that when data capture factors are included, the error rate increases to around 10%. Do you dispute S&T's findings?
No.
Okay. And why does CBP insist on tracking a bogus statistic that ignores passengers who cannot be photographed well enough by the system to be matched?
What we're accounting for is if we take a photograph that's of sufficient quality, are we able to match it?
If.
Correct.
Okay.
And then we know we need to address the camera itself and the lighting conditions to make sure that we are capturing 100% of those photographs that we can then match at the 98 to 99%. Two separate statistics. They're both valuable to us.
Yeah, and there's also the false positive, the cost of the false positive. That individual that is detained for whatever reason because there's a false positive, the cost of that person's health, the cost of that person's well-being, perhaps there's a commerce concern involved. I'm concerned about the lack of accuracy. I'm very concerned about
If a person doesn't match the photo in this case, they present their passport as they're doing today.
Excuse me?
If a person doesn't match a photograph, they simply present their passport
When
and
you're
their
trying
boarding
to
pass.
match them and they don't match, what happens to that
They
individual?
present their boarding pass and their passport, and it's manually reviewed at that point in time, just as happens today.
Is that, and those people aren't detained in any way? They're
no
not
risk.
asked to step aside, they're not asked, there's the process does not delay that person.
No, they
in
just
any
show
way,
their
shape.
passport.
Okay, I hope that's the case. Will CBP commit to tracking a more meaningful statistic that captures the usefulness and accuracy of the full facial recognition process, including the rate at which the system fails to capture a quality image?
We do track those rates. We track what we call the gallery completion rate. We're never going to have 100% of a gallery because not everybody needs a passport to travel.
Including the images that are not high quality, those that fail to meet your standard.
Right. We want to build it so that the camera will take a high quality photo.
I know that's what you want to do,
Right.
but will you be keeping the statistics on what doesn't
So we are.
meet that standard?
Correct, yes.
Very well. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to clarify with the Secret Service. The information that you've collected in this pilot program that you talked about earlier, is it my understanding that everybody that's in that are employees of the Secret Service and they volunteered to be in it?
That's correct. Maybe if I can explain how we're doing the pilot, that might help.
And also, when did the pilot start?
So we published the PIA back in November. It began in December. It's going to run through August. We did that on purpose. We wanted it to go from the winter into the summer because of the different items people wear, so that we had a good amount of time where we were assessing it. But maybe if I just explain a little bit of how the pilots work, and that might help explain this for you. As you indicated, the participants of the pilot are Secret Service employees who volunteer to take part in this effort. The facial images are stored when an associated match is recognized on an individual, on one of the volunteers. Okay? And at the conclusion of the pilot, all that information will be deleted. And we're using our current CCTV system, video management system we have at the White House. I can imagine you've got a similar system up here on Capitol Hill that you use for CCTV surveillance. We're using those video feeds there, and we're trying to match the individuals that are in the pilot, the volunteers, to the people who we're seeing in those cameras. If there's no match, there's no record. If there is a match, then there is a record. That will be retained till the end of the pilot, and then that information will be deleted at the conclusion of the pilot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. But I think Mr. Katko's question was if you were collecting data, capturing data, and you said no. And my question is, whether it's a volunteer or a person walking the street, you are collecting data.
That is correct.
That's right. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Romaine, would you describe biotech biometric technology and facial recognition technology is designed to work with trained agents? In other words, man and machine working together. Is this what NIST is working towards?
We're agnostic as to whether that is the use case or not, but our testing has verified that in the case of facial recognition, the best algorithms and the best human face recognizers, the trained face recognizers.
I thank you for pointing that out in your testimony.
Yes.
NIST has researched in an effort to measure the accuracy of forensics examiners, including forensically trained facial reviewers.
That's correct.
Your statement stated that it presented data comparing state-of-the-art facial recognition algorithms with the best human face identifiers. The best machines performed in the range of the best performing humans.
That's correct.
Who were professional facial examiners. But you went on to state that optimal face identification was achieved only when humans and machines collaborated. Is that an accurate assessment?
That is correct.
And let me ask Commissioner Wagner, is there ever an arrest made or denial to travel based solely on facial recognition technology?
No.
Thank you. So facial recognition technology gets a, let's call it a hit, a high probability based on algorithms that a particular traveler is a person of interest. And then an agent looks into the documentation further and has personal interaction with that individual, which either clears the individual for travel or prompts further and deeper investigation. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So just to clarify for America watching, this technology is being used to enhance the efficiency and the speed by which the trained agents can move travelers through screening points. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you for clarifying that. Is the general consensus amongst travelers and airlines that this technology is a good idea, it's working well?
I believe so, yes.
Thank you for clarifying that. Let me jump into your data breach. It's a concern for all of us, regardless of what side of the aisle we're on. Who reported that breach? Did they self-report or was it discovered? How was it discovered? This is my first two questions about that. Who reported it? Contractor or did you all discover it?
No, I believe we asked them about it.
And how much time went by?
A significant amount of time. I need to verify this, but my recollection seems to be that we asked them and if any of our data was included in it, and they came back and said yes.
And not to put you on the spot here, my brother, but I'm going to. When you say an amount of time, a pretty significant amount of time, you're talking days, weeks, months?
I have that answer. Let me look for that, and I will come back to you.
Okay, would like to know that because the contract was referred to as subsequently terminated, and we would like very much to know what the course of events were regarding what was the timeline here with this contractor, but from the time the breach happened to the time it was discovered and inquired about and reported and verified. And then how much time before that contract was terminated. And I believe I'd like to know, and perhaps my colleagues would like to know, if that contractor is still on a contracting list. That contract was terminated with that contractor, but are they still out there bidding on other contracts? I believe we'd like to know that. Commissioner Wagner, you have a tremendous job to do. You gentlemen, thank you for your service, all of you. It's important to the members of this committee to get things right. Many ports of entry, particularly land ports, face unique challenges implementing the biometric entry-exit system. Can you just share with us, and this is my final question, what are the primary challenges and how can we help?
The primary challenge was finding a way to implement this into a travel system that wasn't designed to support the, say, collection of biometrics on only a segment of the traveling public. You know, unlike Europe and Asia and other places, we don't have departure controls. You don't see a CBP officer to get your passport stamped to depart the United States. We've never restricted departures like that. So international flights commingle with domestic flights. And then with each individual flight, you've got U.S. citizens, permanent residents, and visitors. So how do you sift and sort and differentiate between who's in scope or out of scope of the biometric exit requirement? What technology do you use to collect that biometric? And how do you ensure a way that's not going to create gridlock at the airports or the seaports or the land border when we get to it on how to do that?
And that's exactly what you're working through right now, correct?
Right, so we found a way using the facial recognition to compare people against data they've already provided in a convenient, quick, and accurate way that we can apply to all travelers using different authorities and help the airlines board the planes even faster.
Commissioner, thank you for that
securely.
answer. My time has expired, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from New Jersey for 5 minutes, Ms. Watson Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony. This is really a very important issue for us. I mean, we want to be safe and secure, but we also want to recognize that our privacy is our privacy, and we have guarantees under the Constitution, and that we're not in any way infringing upon that. Mr. Wagner, I'd like to ask you a question. I understand the department has sent an interim final rule to OMB that would expand CBP's collection of biometric data, something we've obviously expressed tremendous interest in. The committee is eager to learn as much as possible about what you intend with this rule and why you haven't pursued a more transparent and deliberative process. What does this interim final rule entail? How does it address CBP's collection of biometric data on U.S. citizens? And why did you choose this closed process rather than providing notice and allowing public comment?
There's several pieces of rulemakings underway. There is an interim final rule that's drafted and is circulating through the government for comment. There's also notice of proposed rulemakings on other parts of what we'd like to propose to do. We're evaluating all of those right now based on a lot of the comments we've received back from within the government, and we may take a different approach. There are regulations in place already, though, concerning biometric exit that have been in place that we're utilizing today. Through the privacy impact assessments, we've explained in great detail, in greater detail than would be in the regulations probably even, how the program operates and what exactly happens with it. That's publicly available.
Are you having conversations with stakeholders?
Absolutely. I've personally done meetings with two different meetings, the East Coast and the West Coast, with the privacy community and all the privacy representatives. We're certainly talking with all of our travel and tourism stakeholders. There's vehement support behind this in the travel and tourism arena. And of course, we're talking with the airlines and airports and our government partners as well.
Why is it that I'm asking you this question about why the committee doesn't have the information it needs? If these discussions have been in the public realm, why am I asking you about this process? What part of this process fits this question about why you've chosen to do it in a more closed way as opposed to a more transparent way? Or am I just misunderstanding and just misstating? What part of your consideration, your rule-making requests, your request to OMB don't fit this sort of public sharing?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, according to the information that I was given, the department has sent an interim final report to OMB. And this interim report has to do with expanding your collection of biometric data. And that the process that you all are using to, in dealing with OMB has been a closed process. What does that mean?
So there's certain provisions that would be in the interim final rule that if OMB were to approve it, we could publish that in the Federal Register. You can still accept comments, I believe, on that, but the rule goes into effect. Really, that,
What is the problem with there being a more open process now?
we're doing that too for the other provisions.
Well, what about the provisions? I'm specifically asking about the provisions that you're not doing it on. And what is the reason for that?
Enough.
All right. So you have a number of proposals, rulemaking proposals,
Correct.
right? Part of this, the department has sent an interim final rule to OMB. And in this particular rule, it deals with the expansion of CBP's collection of biometric data. The understanding that I've been given is that the process that you are engaging in is a closed process, and the committee doesn't have the benefit of what is being considered, what you're asking for. Instead, you've used another process that forecloses that opportunity. So I'm asking, why would you choose to do that? What is it that you're asking for that you can't share in the asking, not after the fact?
Well,
Or is there not such a thing, and we're just completely uninformed?
no, it's just the different portions of the rulemaking process, and before the rule is even finalized, it'd be premature to talk about what's in it or what's not in it, because that is going to change. And based on the feedback and our discussions with OMB, it is going to change.
But you do that on other rulemaking requests, but not on this specific area.
We will be publishing a notice of proposed rulemaking with anything that would fall within those parameters.
I'm somewhat frustrated.
Well, I think the point is at this point, the public has no input in this process, as far as we understand
Yeah.
the rule-making process.
But
No,
this-
normally the notice for rulemaking, you
Right.
push it out and you receive comment.
We will do notice of proposed rulemakings to solicit that feedback.
You will?
We will.
Okay.
Okay, so then that's,
After
we
fact.
we finally
Okay.
got to where we, okay.
May I just have 30 seconds, since you so generously used about, okay,
We'll
thank you.
give you later additional 30 seconds.
I'm just sort of curious about the Secret Service pilot project, and I wanted to understand, I understand that you're using this pilot project now with volunteer service agents so that when they're walking, you collect that information. If it matches, it works. Are you incidentally collecting other information on people who are not part of this voluntary effort? And if so, what are you doing with those sort of pictures that you capture?
So, ma'am, the cameras that we're using as part of this pilot are part of the White House video management system. That's the CCTV system that records videos from all the cameras around the complex. We retain that data for 30 days as part of the CCTV process. So as we're going through and we're identifying those volunteers that are in there, that record is saved, and we save that, and we're going to evaluate that till the end of the process.
But you do have the opportunity to review other faces that you're capturing that are in the vicinity, tourists, demonstrators, whatever.
If it would be like a false positive, somebody who wasn't in our pilot, but it thought it was, that image would be retained, and that would...
If we are concerned about what happens with...
And part of, we will have a classified briefing.
Thank you.
And we'll have a lot of those questions
Thank you
responded to in that.
for the extension of time, and thank you very much, folks, for your...
Thank you. Chair recognizes the young lady from Arizona, Ms. Lesko, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, if you don't mind, I'd like to yield a few seconds to my colleague, Mr. Higgins.
5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 2 op-ed articles in support of law enforcement application of biometric technology. The first is from New York City Police Commissioner James O'Neill, and the second is from Managing Director of the Chertoff Group, Lee Kerr.
Without objection. Gentlelady is recognized for the additional time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 3 letters expressing support for the effective and responsible use of biometrics by TSA and CBP. These letters are from Airlines for America, the International Air Transport Association, and the Global Business Travel Association.
Without objections.
Thank you. All my questions, Mr. Chairman and members, are for Mr. Gould. And my first question, Mr. Gould, is the pilot program that you have working with Delta down in Atlanta. Where do you get the photos from? Is it opt-in? Do you get the database of passports from CBP? That's my first question.
Yes, ma'am. We use CBP's TVS matching service for that. CBP has access to State Department photos for the back-end matching. And then it is a opt-in program. Passengers have the opportunity to choose whether to present biometric identification using the facial capture or to present a credential. And we see a very high rate of people choosing to provide the facial image.
Okay, and so just so that I understand, where do you ask them if they want their photo taken?
Ma'am, there are signs throughout the checkpoint area that say we are piloting this technology and that should you choose not to participate, please let the TSO, the officer, know. As you approach the TDC, the travel document checker position, there's an officer there, and the officer will say, do you choose to provide biometric identification? In which case, if the passenger says yes, they're directed to stand in a specific location for that facial capture. So there's interaction with the officer at that point.
Thank you, that's very informative. My next question is due to, I guess, the success of CBP's use of biometrics, and I think this is, this technology is going to happen. I do agree with other members that we need to make sure that we have privacy and security in it, of course. But are you going to use any of the, is TSA planning on looking at how they can work, I guess, with CBP and their success in order to implement it in more airports?
Yes, absolutely, ma'am. That's the reason we're doing the pilot in Atlanta, is to understand that interaction between us and the CBP TVS system and what benefit that system brings to the TSA checkpoint and the identification verification process.
Good. I'm glad that you're working on it, and hopefully we can get a fairly fast turnaround. I probably would be interested in seeing what you're doing down in Atlanta myself.
Yes, ma'am.
Also, Mr. Gould, are you planning on using this, or have you thought of using biometric technology, or do you, for the employees, the airport employees?
Yes, ma'am. We are considering using biometric identification processes for employees as well.
Thank you. And the reason that I ask that is because from some of our briefings, hearings, I think we've been concerned about insider-type threats. I think what happened up in, what was it, Washington Airport? I can't remember, where an employee took a plane and flew it. Yeah, Seattle, Washington. And so, and with baggage handlers and those type of things. And so it seems to me that it would be logical that we use biometric screening for the employees themselves.
Yes, ma'am. That is certainly something we'll be looking at.
All right, thank you. And I yield back my time.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll now recognize the gentlelady from Texas for 5 minutes of questioning.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I want to start off by asking unanimous consent to put into the record an op-ed by the Houston Chronicle, "Real abuses at the border, squalid conditions for detained migrants are worthy of all outrage Americans can muster." Ask unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Ask unanimous consent from the USA Today article, Monday, July 9th, Acting DHS Secretary defends border conditions.
Without objection.
And I ask unanimous consent to put into the record the IG Inspector's Report dated July 2nd, 2019.
Without objection.
And I ask to put into the record two articles. I'll put them together. They're found both in the New York Times and in the Houston Chronicle. New York Times, New York Times, ICE used facial recognition to mine state driver's license. And then article that says Fed scan driver's license photos for facial recognition, gold mine, and that's Monday, July 8th, and the other is July 7th. Ask unanimous consent.
Without objection.
First of all, let me say to all of you, let me thank you for your service to the nation. I've had the privilege of serving on this committee for a very, very long time. Mr. Wagner, I'll get to the underlying basis of this hearing, but let me be very clear that I have to speak with great ire and dismay for the behavior of individuals at the border and the refusal of the Department of Homeland Security to cooperate with members of Congress. I want to indicate that the $4.6 billion that was given last week and the whining that went on for a period of time to blame Congress was a misrepresentation to the American people, because we understand that reprogramming of dollars can happen at the drop of the hat. And the reason why I say that is, as I go into my questioning regarding these facial recognition, unless the answer changed from the time I was here, I understand there's no statutory legislation or anything that's giving you that authority. You're going to look for it. Maybe you'll answer that question differently. But I just quickly want to say that we will not be able to tolerate. We respect you as servants of the nation. It is unfortunate that very destructive policies of this administration has tainted very fine American servants of the people. And that's what happened. Because when you don't have toothpaste and a toothbrush, and you have a truckload of that material, or nonprofits like the Conscience Presence that I met at the border station 1 and also Clint, begging to be of help, and you're telling the American people there's no one helping you, I think it's a sad commentary. So I just want to make sure you're aware of my dismay, that we will not be tolerated, and the mismanagement will not be tolerated, and the accusations against members will not be tolerated. If Vice President Spence can go in and look after it's cleaned up, spick and span, then members who have oversight responsibilities should be able to go in and look.
Understood.
I'd appreciate if you'd report that back to the Secretary.
I will.
Thank you. Let me say to the gentleman from Transportation Security Administration, I'm interested in you looking into the treatment of Crystal Lynette Saunier and Sharif Mohammed Hotef. We'll give you that information around April 14th in the Atlanta airport. So let me start with Mr. Wagner. This is horrific, the information regarding the use of these, and my earlier information was that you know that people of color and women, so I get it twice, are unfortunately targeted the most. In the article, it says agents with the FBI and ICE have turned the state driver's license databases recognition into a gold mine, scanning through hundreds of millions of American photos without their knowledge or consent. In addition, it says that the State Department motor vehicle databases into the bedrock of unprecedented surveillance and infrastructure. I want to submit into the record, Mr. Chairman, an article by Amazon that says Amazon facial recognition mistakenly confused 28 congresspersons with known criminals. I will not put the congresspersons' names into the record, but I think most of us would like not to be known as known criminals. My question to both of you is, and a little extra time for them to answer, the two gentlemen from TSA and from CBP, how are you doing this with the protections of due process and notice without the notice of the American people that the process even exists? What framework is there to have the firewalls that you're not turning Congresspeople or children into convicted criminals?
We're not seeing those same error rates that can be attributed to specific demographics in how we're doing this. And how we're doing this cannot be compared to previous studies on this. There are different control factors in place. There's different. We're taking a person that is standing in front of a camera where we can take a clear picture, and we're comparing it against a clear set of baseline photos from their passports or their visas, where they were also standing still in front of a camera to capture a clear picture. And that's why we have such accurate rates. Previous studies didn't quite take the same control factors into place. This is not us taking an image of a person and randomly running it against a gallery set of indistinguishable, say, quality photographs and lowering down the accuracy rate as to what constitutes a match to make it match someone that it's not. I mean, you can do the same thing with fingerprints. If you only take 2 points of your fingerprint.
How do you secure that data?
When the photo is taken at the airport, it is encrypted and transmitted to CBP and to our cloud space. It's then templatized, which, my understanding of that is it's turned into a mathematical formula. There's a unique identifier associated with that. There's no biographical data or PII associated with that. It's matched up against our gallery of templatized photos. When there's a match, a message goes back to the camera with just yes or no and that unique identifier.
Let me move quickly to Mr. Gould at TSA, and let me thank TSA for their frontline service of protecting America.
Thank you,
Quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence. Yes, sir. The same question as to how you're utilizing and how you're protecting the data.
Yes, ma'am.
And avoiding this intrusion into the privacy of the American public without them knowing it.
Yes, ma'am. So we're using CBP's TVS system. So the answer that Mr. Wagner provided applies to TSA as well. With respect to the accuracy and the matching, the one thing that I would like to add is the technology is evolving so quickly and it's improving so quickly. We will continue to assess at every step for any additional pilots or when we consider, employing this on a wider scale. We'll assess the best way to get quality image capture and be sure to employ the highest quality algorithms to ensure the highest match rate.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Thank you very much.
Chair recognizes Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the ranking member. Thank the witnesses for appearing. My questions have to do with the surveillance. And my first question is, are all people who are traversing areas within an airport under some degree of suspicion? Who would like to answer, please?
Well, I would say that when a person's traversing an airport, they're not necessarily under suspicion. Airports, utilize security cameras, closed-circuit television for security reasons. With respect to TSA, though, the only reason that we use cameras and capture images is solely for the purpose of identification.
If I could just add that
Please.
What we're doing is absolutely not a surveillance program. This is the picture of an individual is taken with their complete knowledge because they're standing in front of a camera at a time and place where they have to present a physical ID in order to establish their identity to move forward. And we're just replacing the evaluation and scrutiny of the physical ID with the computer algorithm.
Should I assume that persons who enter the airport and who are not within the secured area will not be subject of this technology?
Not by TSA, sir. It solely occurs at either the bag drop or the checkpoint.
Or a time and place where you have to present an identification to establish your identity to go through whatever process that is.
In Houston, the bag drop occurs outside of the building. Before you enter the building, you drive up in your car. You have friends, neighbors with you perhaps, and you go over to an agent, and that person then receives your bag, gives you a ticket. So would it occur in this area, please?
So, sir, right now, the only place that the biometric identification at the bag drop is occurring is in Terminal F in Atlanta. And I went down there, I observed the way the technology...
If I may, because time is of the essence, but we're talking about expanding, are we not?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Here's my concern. Let me go to the point, and I'll be as pithy as I can, but one can only imagine what Mr. J. Edgar Hoover would have done with this technology. It was Mr. Hoover who surveilled Dr. King. They went so far as to send a letter to Dr. King encouraging him to take his life. One can only imagine. Now, I'm not placing you under the eye of suspicion, but it's my job to make sure that this kind of technology is not abused. And I take my job seriously because I'm protecting you by doing my job. So my concerns are, do you alert people in some way so as to advise them that they're being surveilled?
Sir, I wouldn't characterize it as surveillance. The way the alert happens, to use your term, is when you approach the bag drop, The agent will say, would you like to use biometric identification to match you to your bag or something along those lines.
Permit me to ask this. If you believed that this was a form of surveillance, would you alert people? Would you alert the public if you thought this was some form of surveillance?
Sir, we don't do surveillance.
You don't
We're
do
alerting
it,
the
but,
public
but if
through
you
signage.
if you thought, would you recommend, if we were of the opinion that this is surveillance, what do you think we should do? Should we indicate that person should be noticed that they're being surveilled?
So we provide notice before the image is captured. It's purely with the consent
What
of the
about
traveler.
the consent of the person who happens to be with the traveler, who is just a friend?
We solely capture the picture of the traveler who's consented. The camera is only about 2 feet away. You step right in front of it, and it solely captures that image.
All right, thank you. But we are considering expansion. My concern is suspicion-less surveillance. Suspicion-less surveillance. Surveilling persons who are not under suspicion, perhaps by accident. Final question is this, because time is running out. Will there be any means by which persons who are engaged in litigation can acquire access to this intelligence that you have preserved for some length of time, meaning the photographs? Will there be any means by which persons who are engaged in litigation can acquire it?
Sir, the photographs we match against are in the CBP TVS system. They're passport photographs. The images that are captured are not retained in the camera in any respect. We solely get back a match, no match return, if that answers your question.
It really does not, because what I'm trying to get to is this. If persons are engaged in some form of litigation, and one can only imagine what that might be, will they be able to acquire a photo so as to show that a person was at a given location on a given occasion?
I understand, sir. That photo is not retained at all by TSA. So they will not be able to retain it.
It is retained.
It's encrypted. It's transmitted to CBP, and a match rate is returned.
Okay.
If it's a U.S. citizen, the photo's deleted after 12 hours. If it's a foreign national, at the baggage drop, that photo would also be deleted. What we would keep on a foreign national, though, is their boarding of the plane and their final departure to serve as the biometric exit of their departure.
Thank you.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate this, and I assure you that I want us to secure our airports, our ports of entry, but I'm also concerned about suspicionless surveillance. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman, Mr. Guest, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wagner and other guests, thank you for being here today. I know that at least 3 of our witnesses, your departments fall under the Department of Homeland Security. Your website reads as follows: the Department of Homeland Security has a vital mission to secure the nation from the many threats we face. This requires the dedication of more than 240,000 employees in jobs that range from aviation and border security to emergency response, from cybersecurity analysts to chemical facility inspectors. Our goal is clear: keeping America safe. In addition to the agencies that are represented here today, Homeland Security includes the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, the United States Citizen and Immigration Services, the United States Coast Guard, the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It includes FEMA, as well as the Customs and Border Protection, Secret Service, and the TSA. I believe that if these agencies that I just spoke of, if these agencies were abolished, that our country would be substantially less safe. My question, I'll begin with you, Mr. Wagner, is can you please tell me what impact it would have on the people of America if Homeland Security and these agencies for which you serve, if these agencies were abolished by Congress?
Well, there'd be no one to process people coming and going across the border, either U.S. citizens or visitors. There'd be no one to process commercial cargo, to look for harmful goods or products coming in. There'd be no one to collect the taxes that are due on those duties. I mean, CBP collects over $40 billion a year into the U.S. Treasury through duties, taxes, and fees. There'd be no one to do that.
And would you agree with me that the different enforcement capacities that the Department of Homeland Security polices, that it runs a gamut of different things. We just talked about everything from the Secret Service, which provides protection for our dignitaries, TSA, which is responsible for air travel, Coast Guard, border enforcement, that those are very important functions of our government to make sure that these agencies are funded. Would you agree with that, Mr. Wagner?
Yes, the origins of our agency go back to 1789, in the very beginning of the country.
Mr. Gould, would you care to expound on that at all?
Well, I agree with what Mr. Wagner said, and you know, if TSA were not there, the security of transportation systems, not solely air travel, would be in some degree of jeopardy.
Congressman, as you indicated, we protect the president, the vice president, others. We also have criminal investigations, so that is critical work that we're doing.
And would each of you agree that it would be irresponsible to talk about abolishing these agencies that perform such very important tasks on behalf of the American people?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
I would agree with that.
No further questions, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. And I, I know I was late to the hearing today, but I don't really, and maybe it happened before I got here, but I don't really ever mention, hearing anyone mention that these institutions should be abolished, so just for the record. We have the gentleman from Kansas City, Mr. Cleaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm deviating a little. Do you know James Wilson? Any of you know who he is? Probably one of the most important figures that we don't know much about. He signed the Declaration of Independence and eventually became a member, one of the first 6 members of the Supreme Court. And he said that the Congress shall form the Grand Inquisition of the executive branch. And I think that my children's children, and even their children, will study this era and say that's when it got started. I'm concerned. I was in the executive branch, municipality mayor of Kansas City, and so I know there's you guys are busy, especially right now. A group of my colleagues and I signed a letter and sent it to you, Mr. Wagner, Mr. Gould, almost 30 days ago. We haven't gotten an answer. So I didn't know if this was a part of the plan to ignore Congress, or if you're just consumed. And I'm not stupid, so I know you don't have, nobody should expect you to write a personal letter to everybody who writes your letter, even members of Congress. But if you don't have enough staff, we need to know, because until it completely collapses, we are still supposed to provide oversight. And I'm not trying to be hostile. I'm not sure that I can do a good job of being hostile, but I can certainly do a good job of being frustrated. And so I appreciate your work and what you do. But I have to say that it's frustrating just listening, just seeing what's going on, refusal after refusal to allow Congress to do its oversight. And I hope that if I'm around at a time when my voice is important, to say I'm not going to support non-responsiveness to Congress, that I get that opportunity to say it, even if my daddy is in the White House. Now, having said that, some of the questions that my colleagues and I asked, because we thought they were important, I'll ask a couple of them. Time is running out. But is there any statutory authority that would allow the whole process of facial recognition, or is that just an internal move? Anybody?
There's several pieces of statutory authority that authorize us to do and run this program. There's several pieces of legislation from Congress requiring a biometric-based entry-exit system for certain foreign nationals. There's other statutes which authorize us to determine identity and citizenship, including U.S. citizens. There has to be a way for us to make that determination that a person is a U.S. citizen, and there's statutes that authorize us to consider evidence presented by that person to make that determination. And then if it's not to the examining officer's satisfaction, the regulations stipulate that person would be considered and inspected as an alien.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gould.
Sir, from a TSA perspective, the Aviation and Transportation Security Act requires that we screen all passengers and crew boarding aircraft. Fundamental to that screening process is that we positively identify them. The Act mentions exploring the use of biometrics for that purpose. So that's the authority that we're operating under.
Okay, I mean, it wasn't a trick question. I just wanted to know.
No, I understand, sir.
Yeah. Last week, I participated in a demonstration in front of the Treasury Department, along with a number of other individuals. The refusal to put a congressionally approved likeness of an African-American woman on the dollar. That's another whole issue, but I was in front of a demonstration. Should I and the other folk who got off that bus to demonstrate expect that we were somehow surveilled and put in the category of subjects of interest? I mean, since that is what apparently takes place on the grounds of the White House, I don't want to suggest I'm as important as the president or Patrick Mahomes or somebody, but should I expect that?
Congressman, we do have a CCTV video surveillance system in and around the White House. There is a PIA that's published through the Department of Homeland Security alerting people to that. In addition, the cameras that we have, many of them are overt out on Pennsylvania Avenue and on the buildings adjacent to the White House there.
What about other federal departments?
I can't speak to what other federal departments are doing, Congressman.
Okay. All right, thank you. Mr. Gould, nice suit.
Thank you very much, sir. I like yours too.
Yeah. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Now we recognize the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Demings.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses today. Let me just, for the record, say that I respect the jobs that you have to do. I understand how tough they are. I think that all of our jobs have gotten tougher in recent years. I'm not sure why my colleague felt the need to talk about abolishing your agencies, as I know no one on this committee, on either side of the aisle, has ever proposed such an idea. We are the Committee on Homeland Security, and we are here to make sure that you have the tools and resources to effectively do your jobs. But I know that it gets a little tougher when sometimes you receive unjust and improper orders and do not have the resources to effectively do your job. Earlier, I heard one of my colleagues talk about the reason for biometric technologies involve speed and efficiency. Well, I was assigned to the Orlando International Airport as a police commander on the worst day in aviation history on 9/11. I know that the number one responsibility for you is the safety of the traveling public. And if you can ensure that or increase those odds and do it in an efficient and faster way, then that's just icing on the cake. But what sets us apart as we work to keep our nation safe, what sets us apart in this country is that we can enforce the laws and write the laws, but also protect an individual's civil rights. That's what sets us apart, and I will not. Violating civil rights or the perception of violating civil rights is an issue that we cannot ignore and we have to deal with. Look, when we are able to deploy new technology, that's a great and wonderful thing. I remember how exciting that was, but it's our job on the committee and your jobs as the head of your agencies to make sure that we can do it all. And I believe in this nation, we can. I know we have talked about every different thing that we possibly could. We do thank you for your endurance. I just want to go back to just a minute to testing for accuracy and any biases. Could you tell me who sets the minimum standards for this particular program? Like, who decides what testing is done for accuracy or bias is conducted before deploying the technology? How do you get that baseline and say that this technology, we've done the testing, we've spoken to the stakeholders, we are ready for prime time now? Understanding, as I believe you said earlier, that we're always fine-tuning and going back and checking up. But who sets the original kind of standards before deployment? What's acceptable and unacceptable? And Mr. Wagner, we'll start with you.
Sure. So we would do that internally. We would determine what constitutes a match versus a non-match to a photo. We would evaluate this with our DHS Science and Technology department. We would do it in consultation with NIST. We do it in consultation with experts from the industry and the vendors of this equipment. We have partnered with NIST, and starting this summer into the fall, we'll be deeply analyzing the results of our data to make sure that we're not seeing those error rates that are attributable to a certain demographic. We're not seeing it from our internal review of it, but we want to make sure, so we'll bring the experts in to make sure.
So you're saying it's a perception that there's an increased error rate among people of color, or have we seen some data, although not significant, to show that?
I think the studies that shown there were these biases in it had different control factors than how we're using this program. And no one has really studied the way that we are implementing this using those same control factors on how we're doing it. And I would expect them to get the similar results as to we're seeing.
Mr. Gould, can you?
Ma'am, from a TSA perspective, we work very closely with the DHS Science and Technology Directorate as well. They inform our test plans and how we collect data on the biometric pilots and how well they're working, and then they analyze that data on our behalf. So we really do rely on them for their semi-independent and very, very accurate assessments of our capability. And then, like CBP, we rely on our friends at NIST as well to really set the standards and say how well the algorithms are actually working.
So when you decide, Mr. Chairman, if I could just, when you decide that we are ready for deployment, this technology, based on the testing that we've done, is ready for prime time, who makes that decision? Is it a collective effort between the different people that you work with? Or do you decide that individually based on the feedback that you receive?
We would decide that for our agency because it's our responsibility, the officer's determination, you match your passport. And if I use a tool or an algorithm to help me make that decision, at the end of the day, it's still my judgment to do that. So we would evaluate this to say, is this helpful to the officer making that determination that this document corresponds to that person?
And one thing I would add to your original point, for us, the main reason to do this is increased better identity verification, right? And the secure enhancements that are associated with that. Getting people through the checkpoint more quickly, like you said, is kind of icing on the cake. but better security through using this technology is really, really key to us. If the algorithms and the match rates are not acceptable, if we're not enhancing security, then we will not deploy it. But that decision would be made internal to TSA.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. And I just probably due to the time, I will dispense with my questions, but just like to say that obviously based on the questioning from the members of Congress, you can get a feeling on where we are concerned about issues around privacy, around equality, and making sure that the American people and the traveling public is safe. And so we need to continue to evolve, and we know that Homeland Security has been an evolving, living, breathing entity that continues to have to see and recognize issues, try to curtail them and rectify matters that are important to the American people. So I'd just like to say that thank you for your service, TSA, CPB, your jobs, and all of you actually in Secret Service are doing a yeoman's job for this nation, and we appreciate your service and your time here today. So thank you. With that, the hearing is adjourned. Thank you, sir.
1 o'clock, hopefully. 1 to 1:45. Okay. That's very high flood. It's covered. Okay. So this area right here, you guys can be in here, but can't stray. Okay, no problem. So, and if people leave, you're gonna have to head that direction or that direction. No going across the plaza. All right. For members, if they're like straggling, is there a cutoff when they can walk up? I can tell members that you can do something, but motorcade route is four-sided anyway. So. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, the triangle. Okay. Okay. Where are you at? I got one. Yeah. Never have. Yeah. First leaving in 10 minutes. 7.5. Oh, perfect. Yeah. All right. That's what he's supposed to do. You can leave anytime. And then ask him where to go. Well, we're telling you now rather than come over and last minute tell you. They'll tear that thing up. They ain't gonna tear it up. I know everybody around here. They know me. They know me. That'll be a special request. They know me. Go in there and ask anybody. Slice and dice it. They know me. Use the cutters on it, big one. They know me. Hey, Jeff.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Fine.
t-shirts back.
You got yelled at already. There's, I guess it's the
CBD. No, it doesn't go without buying.
What is
no
that?
BBD. You talk about that?
Oh, okay.
Every day, PBD.
No, where this is. I don't know where to put this. I didn't do.
Oh, you sent it.
I mean, kind of. Some Velcro. Yeah. Velcro too.
That was celebrated every day over there.
Yeah. My rainy day.
It's all relative.
It is.
Compare that guy compared to that guy.
I've never had to like.
Yep.
It would have been absolutely
That's why I always
terrible.
this. I like to wear it. It's not cool.
About practice.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that one. I ain't gonna even lie. I didn't like that great. I do like a you the box for a guy.
Yeah, there's a little bit. There's in a,
Hey, buddy.
It felt like that
There's a.
cross the father. Because they were saying that Republicans are still around, very strong. The whole party is shifted much to the right since that
Well,
92 cycle.
that was something. I saw one of my things. Oh, I thought I found a picture.
Everybody liked W as her personality.
Oh, I really like it.
Yeah.
But the decluttering. So I found my Million Man March press pass. I was happy that. And guess what I found? A picture of me working radio out there in the streets. And guess what it was? The Gore, the Chaz. When it was at the Supreme
Hanging
Court.
Chaz.
Hanging Chaz. They got. I said, I've been doing this.
Yeah, that's a big one.
That was a. I said, I will have to do a scrap thing with all my little stuff
Yeah.
that I have. I didn't keep it all the time.
There's just no way to know. Without Thoreau, that phenomenon, without the hanging Chaz,
Where would we be now? Yeah, it was a lot going on.
a lot of Democrats feel like, oh, everything's
Hey. I don't know who that is, but she's here. She's looking at you. Yeah, she works. Yeah,
RFK and MLK both assassinated.
Yeah, apparently it's members only 30 seconds after I walked in.
I'm gonna go sit in the shade.
But 68.
And then I just saw that thing on my leg. Come on.
What's up?
Not much.
I didn't actually ask them why they're back there. I actually said
You look good,
okay.
This is the red one?
Huh?
The Camaro convertible.
It's okay. I like mine better.
Mustangs are pretty good.
I like
It's
it
a little
better.
more, they say it's a little smaller. The Camaro's bigger.
I
It has
didn't
a
look in the
bigger
back.
engine, but you don't really care because you have enough power, right?
Yeah,
you got
my
trouble
engine is
with it.
pretty. If I wanted to.
Oh, good. Is he leaving? Is there a departure?
They're in the horsepower.
Oh, no, it's the that one's not here.
You wanna see that
One's
departure?
leaving, one's coming. Oh, it's just for them.
You rolling?
Yeah. Every time I see a motorcade, I think of what's the movie Upstanding Citizen? No, what's it called? I'm bad at actors. When he gets sent to jail and still does all the shit while he's in